The Nebraska wind doesn't so much blow as it scrapes peeling paint from clapboards, grit from the road, and hope from folks who can't afford to lose any more of it. Autumn of 1882 wears the prairie like a worn coat. Out where the sky is big enough to swallow a person whole, Sarah McKenna stands at the edge of the world she's been trying to hold together, palm shading her eyes, palm braced against the fence post that keeps her from drifting into surrender. The grass used to be emerald and soft when they first staked this claim as newlyweds 5 years, a blink and a lifetime ago. Today, it crunches under her boots like brittle glass. The house groans in the afternoon gusts, boards bowed and grayed by too many seasons of hard weather and too little coin. Samuel built it with his own hands, smiling like a man who could already see a bigger kitchen and a nursery tacked on to the back. "We'll add rooms as we add babies. Sare," he'd whisper, sawdust in his hair, plans in his eyes. Now the place lists just a hair to the east where the foundation has settled wrong. A leaning monument to dreams that didn't get the chance to finish growing. She's tried to shore it up alone cross-bracing, clay packed into cracks, whatever she could manage with a widow's arms, and a prayer, but the prairie keeps a ledger and it always collects. Mama? The water barrels are nearly empty again. 7-year-old Thomas fills the doorway, lean as a fence rail and serious-eyed in a way a child ought not be. He has Samuel's brown eyes, but where Samuel's lit up at every good possibility, Thomas's carry the weight of a boy who's already seeing how quickly the world can subtract a father and leave a hole nothing else quite fills. "I'll draw more after supper," she says, steadying her voice. The well is low, too, though she doesn't tell him that. You ration news as carefully as flour out here. The name that still brings a twist to her stomach drifts up with the dust of memory. The Jameson gang. 14 months since sheriff. Watson rode up with his hat crushed in his hands, and the kind of look that tells you everything before his mouth does. $20 and an old family watch for Samuel's life. What kind of arithmetic is that? A dust devil spins across the yard, scooting past the chicken coop. 3 hens scratch in the hard soil. The rest went for flour and salt the last time she braved Morrison's counter and the whispers that live behind it. Poor thing. Pride won't keep a table set come winter. She hears it even when she's not in the store, the murmured pity, the measured advice. Sell to Hartley, go back east, admit you can't do this alone. As if back east exists for her anymore. As if parents who slammed a door when she chose a dreamer would reopen it now that the life she chose turned. Hard, hoofbeats pull her gaze to the shimmering horizon. A lone rider works out of the heat mirage, moving easy as if saddle and spine were one piece. Even at a distance, she knows the silhouette broad shoulders, hat tipped low, that particular way he sits a horse. Jake Colton Dot with Jake, she always feels 2 things at once. Relief she isn't ready to name, and a prickle that's part caution, part something else. He and Samuel wore the same blue once and managed to survive the war with their bodies mostly intact. After Samuel's death, Jake just appeared. No explanations, no speeches. Split and stacked firewood one morning while she stood on the porch and tried to swallow gratitude big enough to choke a person. Since then, he shows up like weather quiet, unasked, always leaving before gratitude turns into conversation. Afternoon, Mrs. McKenna. He reins in near the fence and touches the brim of his hat. His paint horse storm blows out of breath, ears twitching. Jake's jacket hits the saddle as he swings down. Fence is down along your north pasture. Saw it yesterday. Came back with tools. I can manage, she says because she has to keep saying it, even when it isn't always true. I'm sure you can, he answers without heat, already at the broken post. But I'm here. There's a comfort in watching capable hands move like they've known wood and wire since birth. He works neat and efficient, no wasted motion, no chatter. When the post fights him, the muscles in his back bunch under a sun-bleached shirt. He moves like a man who expects trouble and keeps himself ready for it. "How's the boy?" he asks, still focused on the repair. "Growing out of his britches twice as fast as I can mend him," she says. Then adds, almost reckless, "He's been asking to learn to ride proper." Samuel meant to start him. Jake's hammer pauses mid-er. "I could teach him. If you've a mind for it." She blinks. In all his months of quiet help, Jake has hardly looked Thomas in the eye, like he's keeping a distance he set long ago and won't cross. "That's kind of you, Mr. Colton, but no imposition." The nail seats under 3 precise blows. "Out here a boy needs a good seat and steady hands, Mr. Colton." Thomas appears like he's been waiting for the right moment, eyes bright. "Can I pet Storm?" "By the fence," Jake says, the corner of his mouth lifting the smallest bit. He's particular about strangers. "Let him sniff your hand first." Thomas checks with his mother. Always that, and at her nod he edges toward the paint, small palm out, the way Samuel taught him years ago with their old Mari. Church talk rides the wind, a woman's hushed rumor about Jake's wife dying in the spring, about the mountains swallowing him after, about how grief changes a person in ways time doesn't completely sand smooth. Sarah files the knowledge where she keeps all the scraps that make a person real. It explains the shadows that live in the corners of his eyes. It doesn't explain why his presence feels like both safety and danger at once. The sun slides toward the far line of land, sky smearing into amber. Jake coils the last length of wire, sets his tools back in the saddlebag, and Sarah hears herself say, "We're about to eat. Beans and cornbread. Nothing fancy." "You're welcome." He turns, and she watches a door close behind his gaze. "Appreciate it, ma'am." "Best I get back." Weather's turning. They both look at the bright, empty sky. Both understand weather isn't what he means. Folks in town are thirsty for a story, and a widow supping with a man whose past hangs off him like a long coat. That's a jug that fills itself. "Of course," she says lightly, cheeks hot with disappointment she has no business feeling. He's already in the saddle when he remembers a small cloth sack tucked in his jacket. "Picked these up at Morrison's." He tosses it down, and she catches it by reflex. "Seeds. Kitchen garden'll want them come spring." "How did you—" She stops. Of course, he knows the garden failed. He notices everything he pretends not to. Before she can offer to pay him, before she can ask anything that might push this careful balance into something neither of them is ready to name, he touches his hat and rides away, a dark line against a fading sky. Why doesn't he ever stay? Thomas asks, edging close until his shoulder presses hers. Some folks show they care by not asking for anything back, she says, tucking the seeds into her apron. "Come on, let's get your mama's famous beans that you pretend not to like." The wind picks up again. It rattles windows, shakes loose thoughts, and leaves her with a strange mixture of dread and comfort. Out here, sometimes knowing someone will ride in when posts fall is as close to a promise as you get. The promise breaks the next morning when Ezra Finch rattles into her yard with dust flying, an apology written all over him. Ezra is the bank man they always send when news would sound cruel from anyone else. He holds his hat like it might run off if he loosens his grip. "Mrs. McKenna." "Mrs. I Mr. Hartley, well, there's been a development." She takes the folded paper because you don't refuse the thing that might sink you. Legal language blurs and then sharpens. Mineral rights, prior claim, 30 days to contest. Hartley's name is on it like a stamp of inevitability. The richest rancher in the territory, made richer by money that came west on a train and bought everything that wasn't nailed down, and some that was. Mr. Hartley asked me to express his concern, Ezra says, voice thin with nerves. He's prepared to make a generous offer. He thinks you and the boy would be more? Comfortable back east. Comfortable, she repeats, tasting the word like something gone sour. Tell Mr. Hartley we're comfortable right where we are. After Ezra bumps away, she sinks into Samuel's chair with the paper crumpling in her fist. 30 days might as well be 3, considering what it costs to fight a man who owns half of everything you can see. She hitches the wagon that afternoon because life doesn't pause for trouble, and they need lard and salt and a few things besides. Cedar Ridge looks tired in the way small towns do at 3 in the afternoon, the false fronts throwing long shadows, the porch at the saloon already working on its second round of patrons, the church steeple pointing at heaven like it can tattle. Morrison smells like always. Pickles, coffee, leather, coal oil. It used to smell like abundance. Today it smells like all the things she can't buy if she wants to make it through winter. Mrs. McKenna, Henry Morrison says, eyes kind and cautious. She hands him a short list: flour, salt, a small tin of lard. He weighs each item like fairness is a sacrament he takes seriously, got by the calico bolts. Prudence Hartley, Josiah's sister-in-law. All lace gloves and sharpened smile tilts toward Mrs. Douglas. Josiah's being charitable, Prudence murmurs, pretending her voice isn't carrying. 20% over market. A lady alone ought to be grateful. Seems harsh with winter coming, Mrs. Douglas says. More backbone than Sarah expects. Oh, nonsense. Prudence adjusts a hat that looks like it could pay someone's mortgage. A woman in her position can't afford to be particular. Henry clears his throat louder than necessary. That'll be $2.30, Mrs. McKenna. His look says he heard and hated all of it. She counts out coins with hands steady from practice. Mama, penny candy? Thomas asks, already knowing the answer. Not today, slips out sharper than she intends. He flinches like she slapped him, and the whole store holds its breath. Shame burns hot and bright. She ushers him toward the door, head high because that's all she has left that's free. She walks straight into Jake on the boardwalk, palm hitting his coat before she finds her balance. His hand closes around her elbow warm, steady. In one sweep, he gathers up the situation. Her flushed face, Thomas's wide eyes, the sack of staples not nearly heavy enough. Boy, he says, fishing in his vest, go on and get your mama and yourself something sweet. Mind you share. He sets a penny in Thomas's palm like it's the most ordinary thing he's done all day. Thomas looks up for permission. Sarah nods, and he streaks back inside. You didn't have to, she says. He shrugs, gaze tracking her face. You all right? She almost laughs. Define all right. He studies her like he's reading words. She's tried to hide behind neat stitching and a straight spine. Hartley's rattling his saber. Folks say he's got papers. News travels, she says, and the wind lifts the hair at her temple as if to nod along. You got someone to speak for you? I'll manage. He doesn't push. He just looks. Disappointed? No. Frustrated with the way she shoulders everything herself. Like help is something a person earns instead of accepts. Thomas bursts out holding a paper twist of peppermint sticks. Look, Mama. Mr. Morrison gave me extra 'cause I said please. Imagine that, she says, relief and love biting at her throat. The road home is quiet. Thomas sucks contentedly on peppermint. Contentment being a currency she'd pay dearly for. She could buy it by the pound. Then she sees them. 3 riders looping lazy circles around her yard. Horses tromping through what's left of the kitchen garden. The big one is unmistakable Bull Henderson, Hartley's foreman, famous for a black hat and whiskey breath, and not much else redeeming. Get in the back, she tells Thomas softly. Stay down till I say. But no. She keeps the wagon rolling steady so her hands don't shake. Henderson turns toward her with a smile that shows teeth long since stained. Afternoon, ma'am. Just looking over what'll be Mr. Hartley's soon enough. Assessing value. He draws out the last word like he's savoring it. "There won't be any sale," she says. "You're trespassing." "Her land," one of the others snorts. "That's the question, ain't it?" "Until a judge says otherwise, it's mine," she answers. And she's proud her voice doesn't wobble. Henderson nudges closer, the smell of whiskey a hot shove. "Come now. Be sensible. Take the money. Otherwise? Dangerous place for a woman alone. Accidents. Wells go bad. Stock wanders. Shame, really." She doesn't blink. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Henderson?" "Me?" He widens his eyes like an innocent chore boy. "Just being neighborly." Hoofbeats roll in from the ridge, fast and sure. Jake crests the rise at a gallop, storm eating the ground. He reins in between the wagon and the men, and lets his hand sit casually on the butt of his Colt, like a man who knows exactly how good he is and doesn't need to prove it. "Afternoon, boys," he says, pleasant as a porch talk. The pleasant doesn't reach his shoulders. "You're a far way from the Hartley spread." "Just conducting business." Henderson tries. "Business happens in offices," Jake says, voice still friendly, but with that undertow of steel. "Not in a widow's garden. Mrs. McKenna asked you to leave. This ain't your concern." "Colton, I'm making it my concern." The prairie goes tight, and silent the way it does, right before lightning hunts for something tall. Sarah feels Thomas, small and quiet, curled under the wagon tarp, and she fits the shape of him into her courage. Henderson laughs first, an ugly scrape of sound. No need for gunplay over a misunderstanding. He wheels his horse, jerks his chin, and the other two pull off like dogs yanked by a short chain. "But you can't watch her forever," he tosses over his shoulder. Hartley always gets what he wants. They ride out in a haze of dust and promise. Jake stays where he is a beat longer, eyes tracking them until the dust thins, then turns Storm with a tug and rides to her wagon. "You all right?" The breath she's been holding escapes. "I am now." "Thank you. You got a gun in the house?" "Samuel's rifle. You know it?" "I do." "Keep it loaded," he says. His gaze slips to the trampled plot where her hopes used to grow in neat rows. His jaw tightens. "I'll come by tomorrow. Help replant. Mr. Colton, I can't keep—" "Yes, you can." He looks at her, really looks, and something in his voice softens as if he set aside a weight for one sentence. "Samuel would do the same for my Mary if—" He stops. The name hangs between them like a bridge and a boundary. He doesn't step on to either dot. Thomas sits up in the wagon bed, hair full of hay and peppermint on his breath. "You scared them good, Mr. Colton." "Wasn't aiming to scare," Jake says, mouth quirking. "Just reminding them they've got manners." When he rides away, Sarah sits on the wagon seat a moment longer, reins slack in her hands, heart hammering against a rib cage that feels one size too small. She knows what Henderson meant Jake can't be everywhere. And when he isn't, Hartley's men will circle back like coyotes that learned which fence posts are weak. "Are they coming back?" Thomas asks from behind her, voice small. "Maybe," she says honestly, "because the world doesn't give out fairy tales for free. But we'll be ready." That night, she props Samuel's rifle by the door and checks the chamber twice. Sleep is a thin blanket she can't keep over her shoulders. Every creak, every sigh of the old boards sounds like a boot on the porch, a match struck near dry timber, a whisper outside the window. The seed sack sits on the kitchen table, daring her to believe in spring while winter crouches at the sill. At first light, she finds herself standing barefoot in the garden, cool dirt pushing up between her toes. She gathers the trampled plants, sets what can be saved to one side. The rest she turns back into the soil. She is not a woman who quits. She will replant. She will push back at Hartley with everything she has left. And if help comes riding over the ridge wearing a worn hat and a face she's learned too well. Maybe she'll let it. 3 days later, the night splits open with a sound she'll carry forever, the barn shrieking in flame. But that's ahead of our story. For now, the wind slows to a breath. The house creaks and settles like an old man choosing not to die today. In the quiet, Sarah lays a paw over the seed sack the way other women lay hands on a Bible. She's making a covenant with the morning plant. Mend, stand. And somewhere out on the prairie, a man with storm-gray eyes is checking his bullets like he's making the same promise in his own way. Tomorrow, we'll test both of them. Tonight, resolve is enough. The prairie doesn't sleep, not really. It just waits until you let your guard down and reminds you how fragile survival is. For Sarah, the reminder came as orange light bleeding through her window, the crackle of flames, and the shrieking of terrified horses. The barn. She grabbed Thomas, still groggy in his nightshirt, and shoved him under the bed. Stay down, no matter what you hear. Don't come out. He started to argue, he always did, but the look on her face cut him short. She snatched Samuel's rifle from beside the door and stepped onto the porch barefoot, heart pounding so loud she thought the men circling her yard must hear it too. Bull Henderson stood silhouetted by the fire, massive shoulders outlined against the collapsing roof. 2 more figures moved at his flanks, bandanas pulled high, one swinging a torch in lazy arcs, as if daring her to shoot. Henderson grinned, his teeth gleaming in the firelight. Well now, Mrs. McKenna, looks like you got yourself a fire problem. Shame about barns. They burn quick when a body ain't got help. Leave, she ordered, voice stronger than she felt. Leave before I put one of you in the dirt. He chuckled, stepping closer. 3 of us, one of you. You might drop 1, maybe even 2 if you're fast. But that boy of yours inside? You reckon he can reload quick enough to save you after that? The rifle nearly slipped from her suddenly slick palms. They knew. They'd been watching long enough to know every weakness. Here's what's going to happen, Henderson drawled, voice thick with mock patience. You'll pack up your things and be gone by sunrise. Hartley's generosity expires tonight. Refuse, and come morning, you'll be just another widow, with nothing but ashes to show for her pride. The barn's roof caved with a roar, sparks scattering skyward. Sarah's cattle scattered into the night, their only source of milk and trade vanishing into darkness. Henderson smiled wider. He could smell her despair. She started to lower the rifle, grief and fear curdling into surrender. And then hoofbeats. Hard, fast, and furious Jake Colton burst from the darkness like vengeance itself, Storm's hooves thundering across the yard. He came out of the saddle moving, Colt already in hand. His first shot struck the torch, sending it tumbling into the dirt. His second clipped the brim clean off Henderson's hat. Evenin', boys, Jake said, voice calm, deadly. Bit late for neighborly visits, isn't it? One of the masked men twitched toward his weapon. Jake's barrel shifted and stilled him with the promise of lead. Hands where I can see 'em. Unless you're aching to lose a few fingers. This ain't your fight, Henderson spat, bravado slipping into rage. You made it mine when you brought it here, Jake replied. His gray eyes never wavered. Now you've got a choice mount up and ride out, or stay and learn how fast I can carve you into pieces you'll miss. For a heartbeat, the air hung thick as molasses. Then Henderson barked a bitter laugh, spun his horse, and signaled the others. This ain't over, Colton. You can't watch her forever. Hartley always gets what he wants. They vanished into the dark, leaving behind smoke, ruin, and a silence broken only by the barn's death throes. Jake holstered his gun last, slow and steady, like the fight hadn't already wrung the strength from his arms. Only then did Sarah see the dark stain spreading across his side. You're hurt. Just a scratch. His jaw tightened as he swayed. Inside, now, She ducked under his arm, the weight of him more than she expected, the smell of leather and smoke clinging to him. Together they stumbled into the house, where Thomas peered wide-eyed from behind the kitchen table. "Get the bandages," Sarah ordered, and the boy scurried to obey. Jake sank into Samuel's chair, shirt soaked crimson. When she peeled the fabric back, her breath caught. The bullet had furrowed a deep groove along his ribs, messy but mercifully shallow. "Lucky," Jake muttered through clenched teeth. "Another inch, and we'd be having different words." She cleaned the wound, hands steady, though her heart shook. Thomas hovered, passing bandages, gaze shining with awe instead of fear. Jake gritted against the sting, never making a sound that might scare the boy. Finally, when the bleeding was staunched, Sarah tied off the bandage. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk yourself for us?" He was quiet so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, voice rough, he said, "Samuel saved my life once. Pulled me from a burning depot when everyone else left me for dead. I wasn't there when the Jamesons took him. Couldn't stop it. But I can do this. I can keep his family safe." Her throat tightened. "Is that all we are to you? A debt?" His eyes lifted to hers, gray storm meeting brown earth. "You know better." The weight of that look frightened her more than Henderson's threats, because it carried something she hadn't let herself think about since Samuel's death possibility. Thomas broke the spell, tugging at Jake's sleeve. "You scared them off, Mr. Colton." Like a hero, Jake managed the faintest smile. "Not a hero, boy. Just reminded them to mind their manners." Later, after Thomas had finally drifted to sleep, Sarah stood at the window. Outside, Jake kept vigil in the yard, despite his wound, shadow against the embers of what used to be their barn. His presence was both shield and burden, safety and complication. She touched the cool glass, whispering to herself, "Tomorrow, I'll stop fighting alone, whatever it costs." Because Henderson was right about one thing, it wasn't over. And she wasn't ready to lay down yet. Sunday morning in Cedar Ridge always smelled of dust, starch, and judgment. Sarah sat rigid in her pew, Thomas beside her, squirming like a colt forced into harness. She felt the eyes on her, whispers fluttering like moth wings in the air thick with hymn smoke. The fire had been 3 days ago, and already the town had polished the story into gossip sharp enough to cut. "They say he stayed the night," hissed Mrs. Abernathy to her daughter, 2 rows back. "Stayed, protected, shared a roof," the daughter murmured back, lips pursed. "Is that what they're calling it now?" A decent woman would have gone to the sheriff, not taken up with a drifter. Sarah kept her gaze fixed on Reverend Michaels, who was preaching about virtue, but every line about propriety felt like it was meant for her, as if he had painted a target on her back instead of a cross on the wall. Up front, Josiah Hartley sat tall and smug, filling the first pew with his wealth and his presence. His suit was cut fine, his boots polished, his hair too neat for a man who claimed to be of the frontier. He owned the room without a word, and everyone knew it. When the final hymn dragged itself to an end, Sarah tried to slip away with Thomas. But Reverend Michaels intercepted her at the door, his face lined with what he must have thought was concern. Double quotes, "Mrs. McConnell, a word, if you please." She sent Thomas on to the wagon with a gentle pat and braced herself. "Yes, Reverend?" "I've heard troubling reports," he said, voice pitched low but sharp. "The fire, the altercation, and of course Mr. Colton's involvement." "He helped defend my property," Sarah replied evenly. "I don't see what's troubling about that." "My dear woman," his tone oozed pity and reproach, "surely you understand how it appears. A widow, alone, accepting protection from a man with reputation." "People talk. People always talk," Sarah said, chin rising. "Perhaps they might find better use for their tongues." His cheeks flushed. "I only seek to help." Your position is delicate. Mr. Hartley has expressed concern. Has he? Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. How very Christian of him, burning down barns one day and expressing concern the next. That's a grave accusation, Michaels hissed. Without proof, you tread dangerous ground. I've been treading dangerous ground for 14 months, she snapped, stepping past him. Thank you for your sermon, Reverend. Now let me pass. Outside, the autumn sun was weak against the weight of stairs. She bundled Thomas into the wagon, while clusters of townsfolk gathered in little knots, whispering. She could feel their judgment like burrs on her skin, and then Hartley himself came strolling toward her, the crowd parting like water before a barge. He was a handsome man in the way only money could buy polished, perfumed, smug. Mrs. McKenna, he said smoothly, tipping his hat. Such misfortune, the fire. Fires are so destructive. A tragedy, especially when deliberately set, Sarah shot back, not bothering to soften it. His smile didn't slip, but his eyes turned colder than river ice. That's a dangerous accusation. Do you have proof? I have the word of the men who lit it. They named you plainly. Criminals, Hartley scoffed. Unreliable creatures. Whereas I, Mrs. McKenna, am offering you stability. Generosity? 20% over market value for your land. Enough to give you and your boy a fine life back east. My husband is buried there, she said, voice flat. The land is not for sale. Everything is for sale, Hartley murmured, stepping closer. And what isn't can be taken. The law favors those who can afford it. Pride and poverty won't buy justice. Before she could retort, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Mr. Hartley. Jake Colton appeared at her side, dressed in a dark coat that almost hid the bandages beneath. He tipped his hat to Sarah before turning his storm-gray gaze on Hartley. Fine sermon today, wasn't it? All that talk about bearing false witness made a man think. Hartley's smile thinned. Colton, I heard you've been meddling where you don't belong. Just being neighborly, Jake replied, his hand resting near his gun in a way that wasn't a threat, but wasn't far from one either. Helping where I can. Christian duty and all. Is that what you call it? Hartley's tone dripped contempt. Interesting interpretation. Though I suppose a man like you has unique ideas about duty. Jake's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. We all carry our crosses. Some of us just do it more honestly. For the first time, Hartley's mask cracked, just a hair. He stepped back, hat tipping once more. Well then, I'll leave you to your neighborly activities. But remember, Mrs. McKenna, my offer won't stay open forever. Consider your son's future carefully. He strode off, and the onlookers scattered, eager to avoid being caught in the crossfire of two men, circling like wolves. You shouldn't have come, Sarah whispered to Jake as he swung into the saddle. Things are already worse, he said simply. I'll ride with you. Make sure you get home safe. The wagon rolled through the afternoon sun, Jake shadowing them on Storm. Sarah kept her eyes on the road, but her thoughts twisted in 100 directions. The barn lay black and skeletal against the sky when they crested the hill. Every charred beam looked like an accusation. You failed. You're alone. Jake guided Storm closer. I know a man in Pine Valley. Owes me a favor. He's got lumber. Maybe hay, too. I can't. You can. And you will, he said, the firmness in his tone brooking no argument. Samuel would have done the same. Always Samuel between them. The ghost that both bound them and stood in the way. The rest of the afternoon passed in silence, broken only by work. Jake showed Thomas how to clear burned debris, how to salvage what could be saved. Sarah found herself moving in rhythm with them, the three of them working side by side as if it had always been so. As dusk deepened, Jake lit a small fire in the yard-controlled, safe, Nothing like the inferno that had stolen their barn. They ate beans and bread together, and for a fleeting moment, Sarah let herself imagine it was normal. That they were a family, not a widow, a child, and a wounded drifter pretending at belonging. "Tell me about the war," Thomas blurted suddenly, crumbs on his chin. "Mama says you and Papa were soldiers." Jake stared into the fire for a long beat. "That's right. We rode with the 7th Cavalry. Did you kill lots of enemies?" "Thomas," Sarah scolded, but Jake lifted a hand. "It's all right. War's not about killing, boy. It's about surviving. About protecting the man next to you and hoping he does the same. Your papa, he was the best man I ever rode with. Brave, loyal, kind, even when kindness was dangerous. How did he save you?" Thomas leaned forward, eyes shining. Jake looked across the fire at Sarah. "Depot fire. I was trapped under a beam. Smoke was thick enough to choke the world. Everyone else pulled out. Your papa came back. Got me free when no one else would." "Wow," Thomas whispered. "Just like you saved us from Henderson." Jake shook his head. "No, your mama saved you. I just evened the odds." Sarah met his gaze. "Don't sell yourself short." For a moment, the firelight carved their faces into something intimate, something dangerous. Jake broke it first, standing abruptly. "I'll check the perimeter before dark." She rose too, unable to sit still under the weight of the unspoken. "What Hartley said about your past. Is it true?" Jake's face hardened. "I've done things. After the war, some of us didn't lay down arms right away. Took a while to find my way back to civilized. The darkness is still in me, Sarah. Always will be. We all have darkness," she whispered, stepping closer. "What matters is what we do with it." He looked at her as if trying to decide if she was naive or brave or both. "Your husband was a lucky man," he said finally, voice rough. Luckier than he knew. And then he walked away into the gathering dark, leaving Sarah staring into the fire with a heart that no longer knew which way was safe. The morning broke quiet, too quiet, the kind that made Sarah's skin prickle with warning. She was ladling coffee when she saw them, dust rising from the valley, riders coming steady and official. Not Henderson's swagger this time. Badges glinted in the pale sun. Sheriff Watson led them, 5 deputies at his back. His face carried the look of a man sent to his own hanging. Jake appeared in the doorway before she even had time to think, rifle already in hand. "Pack what you need," he said low. "Take Thomas to the canyon. I'll hold them off." "No," Sarah snapped, slamming the coffee pot onto the table so hard it sloshed. "I won't run from my own home. Not now, not ever. Sarah, they're lawmen. If I fire on them, you'll hang." "Exactly." She pushed past him and strode onto the porch, chin high, heart galloping like a spooked horse. Watson reined up at the gate, dust clinging to his coat. "Mrs. McKenna," he said, touching his hat brim without quite meeting her eyes. "Got papers here. Court order. Judge Blackwood says you're to vacate the premises pending resolution of Mr. Hartley's claim." Sarah took the document with trembling fingers. The words swam, but one date leapt out at her, filed a week after Samuel's death. Fraud. Her blood boiled. "This is false," she said, voice sharp as broken glass. "Filed after we'd already homesteaded 3 years. You know that, Sheriff." Watson's mouth pinched. "That's for the court to decide. You've got till noon to clear out." Jake stepped onto the porch, presence coiled and dangerous. "How much did Hartley pay you, Tom?" Color flushed the sheriff's neck. "Careful, Colton. You're already walking a thin line. This isn't law," Jake barked, bitterness raw in his throat. "This is theft dressed in seals and paper." "Nevertheless," Watson said stiffly, hand on his revolver. "Mrs. McKenna, Will you comply? If I don't? Sarah asked. Then I'll have to arrest you. His voice cracked on the words. Please, Sarah, don't make me do this. Think of your boy, Mama. Thomas's small voice floated from the doorway. He stood barefoot, nightshirt askew, fear in his eyes. Sarah's heart nearly broke, but she thought of Samuel of mornings. He'd kissed her goodbye on this very porch, of the dreams he'd poured into this land. She squared her shoulders. You'll have to arrest me, Sheriff. I won't abandon Samuel's land on Hartley's word. The deputies shifted uneasily. Everyone knew Jake's reputation, and the way his hand hovered near his gun belt didn't soothe nerves. Watson swallowed hard, caught between duty, bribery, and fear. Finally, he exhaled. 3 days. I'll give you 3 days to set your affairs in order. But come Thursday, if you're still here. His shoulders sagged. I'll have no choice. One of the deputies started to protest, but Watson silenced him with a glare. 3 days. That's the best I can give. They rode away, leaving silence and dust in their wake. Sarah sagged against the doorframe. Paper crumpled in her fist. 3 days, she whispered. How do we fight a man who owns half the county in 3 days? We move fast, Jake said, already pacing like a caged panther. County seat. File a counterclaim. Find witnesses who'll swear when you and Samuel homesteaded. Jake. She began, but he cut her off. Yes, I have to. Samuel would want. This isn't just about Samuel, she said, finally making him stop. What about what you want? He froze, eyes unreadable. What I want doesn't matter. But Sarah heard the lie in his voice, and it tangled itself around her heart. The morning blurred into frantic work. Jake saddled Storm and rode for neighboring homesteads, calling in favors. Sarah dug out old papers, deeds, scraps of proof, trying to keep Thomas busy with chores. He was too young for dot by noon. Despair pressed down heavy. Even with papers, even with neighbors, how could they match Hartley's money? The law bent toward wealth. When she could bear it no longer, Sarah slipped away to the small hill behind the house, where Samuel rested beneath a weathered wooden cross. I don't know what to do, she whispered to the earth. I'm trying to hold on, but maybe I'm only being stubborn. Maybe Thomas would be safer somewhere else. Safer, came Jake's voice behind her, but not home. She turned, startled. He carried a handful of wild flowers, hardy blooms that survived autumn's chill. He knelt and laid them gently at Samuel's grave. Samuel never shut up about you, Jake said quietly. During the war, it was always Sarah this, Sarah that. Drove us all mad, the way he could connect anything back to you. Rain? Reminded him of you. Beans for supper? Said you made them better. Stars? He swore yours were brighter. Despite herself, Sarah smiled through the ache. He was a romantic fool. A fool, maybe. But practical, too. Jake straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. Made me swear once, if anything happened to him, I'd look after you. That was the last night before we mustered out. Jake's eyes burned with guilt. I failed him once. Let him ride into that ambush alone. Too drunk to have his back. I won't fail him again. His self-loathing hit her like a knife. She reached for him without thinking, her hand covering his clenched fist. You can't save someone already gone, Jake, and you can't spend your life in penance for a death you didn't cause. Something shifted in his storm-gray eyes, something unguarded and raw dot, and then gunfire split the stillness. 2 sharp cracks from the direction of the house. Then a scream. Thomas. Sarah bolted, skirts bunched in her fists, Jake already thundering beside her. They crested the rise and saw chaos. Henderson and 3 men had Thomas cornered by the chicken coop, the boy clutching a kitchen knife with trembling hands. A thin line of blood marred his cheek. Let him go, Sarah shouted, Fury lending her voice powered out, Henderson turned, smiling like a wolf. Teaching the pup respect. Don't worry, ma'am. We'll only scar him a little. You have no right, she spat. Got all the right I need, Henderson sneered, hand hovering near his revolver. His pale-eyed companion grinned, rifle at the ready. Jake went still too still. A stillness that meant violence was a breath away. Let the boy go, he said softly, deadly. Henderson's smile widened. Glad you're here, Colton. Saves me hunting you down later. Then everything exploded. Chaos erupted in the yard, the air suddenly thick with gunsmoke and fear. Henderson's hand twitched for his pistol, but Jake was already moving fast, smooth, deadly. His Colt barked once, the bullet shattering Henderson's gun hand and sending his revolver spinning into the dirt. Henderson howled, clutching the ruined hand, rage twisting his face. The second shot dropped the pale-eyed rifleman before he could squeeze his trigger. Jake rolled behind the water trough as the two remaining men opened fire, bullets chewing into the fence posts and splintering the coop behind Thomas. Thomas! Run! Sarah screamed, but her boy froze, terror locking his small body in place. His knuckles were white around the kitchen knife, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. Jake rose and fired again, deadly precise. One more outlaw fell, crumpling in the dust. The last one, desperation bright in his eyes, lunged forward, seizing Thomas by the collar and yanking him up as a human shield. Drop it, Colton! A man shouted, pressing his revolver against Thomas's head. Drop it or the boy dies. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. She started forward, but Jake's hand shot up, steadying her even as his gun stayed level. His gray eyes went hard as steel. Don't do this, Jake warned. You don't walk away from using a child for cover. But the outlaw sneered. I'll take my chances. He never finished. Jake's shot cracked, echoing off the prairie. The bullet struck between the man's eyes, so close the powder burned Thomas's hair. The outlaw collapsed in a heap. Thomas, stumbling free with a sob. Sarah snatched him into her arms, checking frantically for wounds. Only a graze on his cheek. Thank God. Her hands shook as she kissed his forehead again and again. Henderson was still writhing on the ground, clutching his ruined hand and cursing. Two of his men lay dead. Another fled into the trees. The yard smelled of blood, cordite, and smoke. Jake crouched beside Sarah and Thomas, voice gentler now, though his eyes kept scanning for threats. You're safe. Both of you. Safe. The word rang hollow. Sarah knew better. This wasn't a property dispute anymore. It was blood war. Hartley wouldn't stop. Not after this. We have to go, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Before the sheriff comes back, before Hartley spins this. Jake nodded once, decisive. Pack light. Only essentials. I know a place in the mountains we can lay low. He looked at her squarely. Hartley will call this murder. He'll hunt us. Sarah met his gaze, the truth hammering in her chest. Then we're fugitives now. Not fugitives, Jake corrected. Survivors. Together. They moved fast, Sarah stuffing what little she could into a sack while Thomas clung to her skirts. Jake saddled the horses, his movements efficient despite the blood seeping through the fresh bandage at his ribs. Sarah's fingers lingered on Samuel's rifle before she grabbed it. She couldn't leave it behind. By the time the sun began to dip, 3 figures rode hard away from the homestead, Sarah, Thomas, and Jake leading them toward the dark line of mountains. Behind them, smoke rose from the house. Sarah had lit it herself before they left, watching the flames consume everything, her home, her past, her grief. Better ashes than Hartley's prize. She didn't cry. Not this time. She was beyond tears. The trail climbed rough and steep. Thomas, exhausted from terror and flight, swayed in his saddle. Jake simply reached across and lifted the boy onto Storm. cradling him against his chest as though he weighed nothing. "I've got you," Jake murmured, though Sarah couldn't tell if he meant Thomas or all of them. The night grew cold. Stars glittered above like 1,000 watchful eyes as the prairie fell away. Sarah stole one glance back at the burning homestead, then forced herself to face forward. The widow she had been was gone, left behind in the ashes. Whoever she was becoming, she would have to find out on this trail. The cave Jake led them to was hidden behind a fall of rock and scrub pine, invisible unless you knew where to look. Inside, the chamber widened into a rough shelter stone walls darkened by old fire rings, shells carved by forgotten hands. A narrow shaft let smoke escape. "Old hideout," Jake explained, unsaddling Storm. "Back when I wasn't so law-abiding. Water source at the rear. 2 exits. We'll be safe here a while." Safe. Sarah doubted she'd ever feel it again. But Thomas's wide eyes turned curious instead of frightened as he explored the cavern, his boyish resilience turning terror into adventure. "He's tougher than he looks," Jake said softly, following her gaze. "Takes after his mama." Sarah hugged herself, shivering despite the fire. "I should have taken Hartley's money," she muttered. "Gone back east." Jake shook his head. "Where? To family who disowned you? To a city where you'd be just another widow taking in washing? No, Sarah. You fought for your home. There's no shame in that. 4 men are dead because of my pride. No." His voice was steel. 4 men are dead because they tried to harm a child. And I'd kill them again without blinking. The certainty in his tone should have chilled her, but instead wrapped around her like a blanket. In a world where the law bent to money, Jake's brutal loyalty felt like the only thing she could trust. They fell into a strange routine over the next 3 days. Jake hunted and scouted, returning with rabbits or venison, always alert, always listening for pursuit. Sarah kept the fire, made meals from their meager supplies, and taught Thomas lessons scratched in the dirt. At night, they sat by the flames, Jake telling stories carefully polished, a blood for a boy's ears. But every evening, when Thomas finally drifted off in his bedroll, the silence between Sarah and Jake grew heavy with unspoken things. On the 3rd night, she broke it. "We can't stay here forever." Jake was cleaning his rifle, hands steady. "No, another day or 2, then north. Wyoming, maybe. Start fresh where nobody knows us." "As what?" she asked quietly. "Hired hand and widow? Cousins or something else?" He set the rifle aside, meeting her gaze across the fire. "That's up to you, Sarah." She thought of everything she had clung to: propriety, reputation, the rules of a world that had given her nothing but judgment and ashes. Here, in this cave, with a wanted man and a sleeping child, she felt more alive than she had in months. "I'm tired of pretending," she whispered. "Tired of being the proper widow, the helpless woman. I want to be alive, free, with someone who sees me as I am." Jake's jaw worked, emotion raw in his eyes. "You were going to tell me something, back at Samuel's grave. Before the shooting." She turned toward him, heart pounding. "Tell me now," she said. He was quiet a long time, the fire painting his face in shadow and light. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I've loved you since the day Samuel introduced us. You had flour in your hair from baking, wore a blue dress with little flowers. You laughed at something he said, and I thought, God help me, I thought I'd never heard anything so beautiful." Sarah's breath caught. "I never said anything," he went on. "Never would have. He was my brother in all but blood. You loved him, and I respected that. But after he died, I told myself I was just keeping a promise. Just looking after his widow." His hand clenched on his knee. "But that was a lie. Every time I came, every time I saw you fighting to hold on alone, I wanted to say the words." "What words?" she whispered, Jake's storm gray eyes locked with hers. His voice was hoarse, but steady. Get your things. You're mine now. The fire popped, and Sarah's world shifted. For a long moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. The firelight flickered across Jake's face, throwing sharp shadows into the hollows of his eyes. His words still rang in her ears, rough, raw, too plain to be poetry, but more honest than any speech she'd ever heard. Get your things. You're mine now. Her throat worked, but no sound came. She felt as if she'd been balanced on the edge of a cliff since Samuel's death, and Jake had just shoved her into the open air. Jake must have read her silence as rejection. He leaned back, walls slamming up in his eyes again. That distance she'd grown used to, but hated. I shouldn't have said that. Not here. Not now. Forget it. No, Sarah said sharply, surprising them both. Don't you dare take it back? He blinked, uncertainty flashing across his usually steady face. Sarah leaned forward, her voice low, trembling but sure. I want to be yours, Jake, not because I need protection, not because we're running, because somewhere between the ashes and the firewood, I fell in love with you two. For the first time since she'd known him, Jake Colton looked stunned. His breath caught like a man gut-punched, and a sound escaped him half-groan, half-prayer. Sarah, he rasped. Are you sure? Once we cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be tied to a man with blood on his hands, with a past that won't stay buried. Sarah thought of the burned barn, of Henderson's threats, of Samuel's grave. She thought of Thomas, already curled in sleep nearby, safe because Jake had stood between him and death. She thought of herself, no longer a trembling widow, but a woman who had stared down fire and guns and refused to bend. We all have pasts, she whispered, tears burning her eyes. What matters is the future. Our future. Jake's hand rose as if against his will, rough palm cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear, and then his mouth found hers. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was hungry, desperate, forged from loneliness and fear and the fire they'd been denying for too long. Sarah clutched his shirt, feeling the heat of him, the solid strength, the reality of being wanted, not as a burden, but as a woman. When they broke apart, breathless, Jake pressed his forehead to hers. Tomorrow, he said hoarsely, we'll find a preacher. Make it proper, legal. Sarah laughed through tears. Since when do outlaws care about legal? Since they fall in love with respectable widows. He kissed her again, slower this time, reverent. You deserve better than a cave and a wanted man. But I'll spend my life trying to give you the world. A soft cough startled them both. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Thomas stood at the edge of the firelight, hair tousled, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Mama, are you crying? Sarah hastily wiped her cheeks. Happy tears, sweetheart. Come here. He padded over, blanket trailing, and wedged himself comfortably between them with the unself-conscious trust of childhood. He leaned against Jake's side as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Are we going to be a real family now? He mumbled, already half asleep again. You, me, and Mr. Jake? Sarah looked at Jake over their son's head. The question in her boy's voice was the same one burning in her own chest. Jake's arm came around Thomas, pulling him close. His eyes found hers, steady and sure. Would you like that? Yeah, Thomas whispered, yawning. Mr. Jake teaches me to track and shoot, and he tells better stories than anyone. And he doesn't look sad all the time like you do. Sarah's laugh was wet, broken, but real. She kissed Thomas's curls and met Jake's gaze again. Then yes, she said softly. We're going to be a real family. Thomas sighed in contentment, already drifting. Can we have a real house too? Not just a cave. A house with a porch and a barn and a dog. A big, mean one. Jake chuckled low, his voice rumbling against them. We'll have all that. North of here, where the grass is green and the water runs clear. I'll build it myself. A porch for your mama, a barn for the horses, and the biggest dog we can find. Sarah felt something bloom in her chest she thought had died with Samuel Hope. This, she realized, was what she'd been fighting for. Not just land or legacy, but this, a boy safe in her arms, a man beside her who would bleed to keep them whole, and a dream that wasn't built on ghosts, but on the future. Morning came sharp and cold. Jake was up before dawn, scouting the ridges. When he returned, his face was grim. Search parties in the valley, he said. Hartley's put a bounty out, 500 for me, 100 for you. Sarah arched a brow despite the knot in her stomach. Only 100? I should be insulted. Jake stared at her, then barked a surprised laugh, a sound raw, genuine, and startling. That's my girl. Finding a fight even in bad news. But the humor faded fast. They packed quickly, leaving the cave that had become their first true home together. Sarah touched the soot-blackened stones of the fire ring before they left, a strange pang tightening her chest. Here, in hiding, she had found herself again. Found him, ready? Jake asked, swinging Thomas into Storm's saddle. Sarah mounted her own horse, drawing in a breath of cold, pine-scented air. Ready. They rode out into the morning light, three figures bound together, now not by desperation alone, but by choice. Behind them lay ashes. Ahead waited danger, but also possibility, and Sarah McKenna, soon to be Sarah Colton, realized she no longer felt like prey. The sun crept higher as they rode, the air thinning with altitude. Pines closed in around the trail, the canyon walls red and sheer. Sarah kept her gaze forward, but unease pressed heavy on her shoulders. Jake's posture had gone taut, every muscle coiled as if waiting for a blow. He raised a hand suddenly, halting Storm mid-stride. Quiet. The morning wind carried faint sounds, laughter, spurs striking stone, the metallic rattle of rifles. Sarah's stomach dropped. How many? She whispered. Jake's gray eyes narrowed toward the bend ahead. 4, maybe 5. They're waiting. Is there another way? Not without losing 2 days. Hartley knew he'd take Eagle Pass. He turned to her, his face grim. Sarah, I need you to take Thomas up that ledge. 20 feet. Stay hidden no matter what happens. Her spine stiffened. No, we're not separating. Sarah, I can shoot, she cut in, her hand brushing Samuel's pistol at her hip. You taught me yourself these past days. We face this together, or not at all. Jake studied her for a long moment, jaw working. Then he gave a slow nod. All right. But Thomas goes up. Non-negotiable. They found a grove of juniper and secured the horses. Jake boosted Thomas onto the narrow ledge, pressing his small derringer into the boy's hand. Only if someone tries to climb up after you, he said firmly. Aim for the chest, squeeze gentle. Thomas swallowed hard but nodded. Fear and determination warred in his young face. Sarah kissed his forehead quickly before she turned back with Jake toward the ambush. Henderson's voice carried first, bouncing off canyon stone. Rough, mocking. Should have killed that brat when I had the chance. Would have saved us this chase. Sarah's blood went ice cold. Another man's voice answered. Hartley wants them alive. Especially the woman. Says he's got plans for her. Sarah's skin crawled. Jake had gone utterly still beside her, his gray eyes dark with fury. Alive doesn't mean untouched, Henderson chuckled. Plenty of ways to make a woman compliant. Sarah gripped her pistol tighter, bile rising. Jake slid behind a boulder, raising 3 fingers, then pointed. 3 visible, at least 2 more hidden. He leaned close enough for his breath to brush her cheek. I'll draw fire. When they turn, You take whoever's nearest. Then get back to Thomas. Before she could protest, he moved, stepping out into the open, voice carrying smooth as silk. Henderson! Thought you'd be nursing that hand I gave you. Gunfire erupted instantly, bullets sparking off stone. Jake dove for cover, rifle already spitting back. Sarah spotted a lean outlaw scrambling for position. She drew in a steadying breath, remembered his lessons: clear sight, steady hands, squeezed out. The pistol bucked. The man cried out, spinning with a shoulder wound. The woman! Get the woman! Someone shouted. Sarah scrambled back, fumbling to reload with trembling fingers. A figure loomed above her, bandana shadowing his face. Instinct screamed. She fired, the shot taking him in the chest. He toppled back with a grunt. Sarah, down! Jake's voice roared. She dropped flat as his rifle cracked overhead, dropping another man mid-charge. But Henderson still stood, directing the chaos with his bandaged hand. And then Sarah's heart stopped. Thomas's scream split the canyon. A fifth man had circled behind, climbing toward the ledge. Her son stumbled back, Derringer forgotten, terror pinning him in place. Without thought, Sarah bolted from cover, sprinting across open ground. Bullets sparked off rock around her, but she only saw Thomas's small figure cornered on the ledge. The outlaw reached for him. Jake's rifle boomed, and the man toppled backward with a scream. But in the instant Jake fired, Henderson charged Sarah. The impact spun her sideways. Fire seared across her ribs as a bullet grazed her. She hit the ground hard, vision white with pain. Got you now, witch, Henderson snarled, boot slamming her pistol away. Agony flared as he kicked her wounded side, stars bursting in her vision. He bent down, his breath rancid with whiskey. Hartley'll pay double for you alive. The shot that killed him didn't come from Jake. It came from above. Sarah blinked through tears to see Thomas on the ledge, both hands clutching the Derringer, smoke curling from the barrel. His small face was pale, his eyes wide with shock and terror, but steady. Henderson's body jerked, surprise frozen on his features, before he crumpled lifeless at her feet. Thomas! Sarah gasped, her voice breaking. Then Jake was there, dragging her into his arms, checking the wound with frantic hands. How bad? Just a graze, she whispered, clutching his shirt. Blood slicked her side, but she knew it wasn't deep. Thomas's shaky voice drifted down. Mama, I got him. Just like Mr. Jake said. Jake's voice was raw as he called back. You did good, son. You saved your mama. The canyon had gone silent except for Sarah's ragged breaths and the ringing in her ears. 5 men lay dead, dust settling around them. Jake bound her ribs quickly with torn strips of his shirt, his hands surprisingly gentle. We need to move. Hartley'll send an army when he hears of this. Sarah caught her son as Jake helped him down from the ledge. Thomas clung to her, trembling, tears streaking his dirty face. She stroked his hair, whispering, You saved my life. You're the bravest boy I know. I was scared, he admitted in a small voice. But he was going to hurt you. And Mr. Jake says, We protect family. The word struck Sarah deep. Family. She looked at Jake, meeting his storm-gray eyes over their son's head. Despite the blood, the pain, the danger, she saw the truth. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting, and they were doing it together. The meadow where they camped that night was quiet, too quiet. A stream gurgled nearby, cool water catching the moonlight, but Sarah felt every shadow pressing in. The wound along her ribs throbbed, sharp reminders of how close she'd come to dying. Thomas leaned against her, already half asleep, despite everything. Jake knelt beside her, binding her side with clean cloth from their dwindling supplies. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. You'll have a scar, he muttered, almost apologetic. Sarah tried to smile. Another one for the collection. He didn't return the smile. His storm-gray eyes lifted to hers, heavy with something raw. What you did breaking cover for Thomas, that was brave. But damn foolish, she bristled. He's my son. I know. Jake's voice dropped, almost breaking. But if I'd lost you, his hands stilled on the bandage. I can't lose either of you. Not now. The fire crackled between them, throwing sparks into the night. Sarah reached for his hand, squeezing hard. Then don't talk like you already have. We're alive. That's enough. Jake swallowed, nodding once. But the look in his eyes said it wasn't enough. He wanted more for all of them. The next morning, Jake returned from scouting with grim news. Hartley's doubled down. He's got posters out. 500 for me. 100 for you. Sarah arched an eyebrow despite the fear knotting her stomach. Only 100? I'm worth more than that. For the first time in days, Jake laughed. A low, surprised sound that softened his hard edges. That's my girl. Finding fight, even in a bounty notice. But the laugh died quick. We can't keep running. He'll never stop. Sarah stared into the flames, thinking of Samuel, of their burned homestead, of Thomas holding that derringer with shaking hands. Then we stop him. Jake frowned. How? Turn the tables. She met his gaze, steady. Hartley's the criminal. We get proof. Take it to someone he can't buy. He considered it slow. That's a dangerous game. Sarah's chin lifted. So is running. At least this way we fight for something. They rode back toward Cedar Ridge under cover of night. Thomas was left with a trusted friend in a hidden valley, one of Jake's old war contacts who owed him a debt. It broke Sarah's heart to leave him, but she kissed his curls and whispered, "Be brave. We'll come back for you." Then she and Jake slipped into town like shadows. Morrison's General Store was their first stop. Sarah knew where Henry kept the spare key, under the third flower pot by the back door. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee beans and coal oil nearly undid her. How many times had she stood here as a wife, then as a widow, never imagining she'd return as a fugitive? The ledgers were where she hoped. Page after page showed Hartley's payments, bribes to the judge, to deputies, even to Sheriff Watson. Sarah's hands shook as she copied the entries by lantern light. Proof. But a floorboard creaked behind her. She spun, pistol in hand, only to find Henry Morrison himself, shotgun raised, nightshirt hanging loose. "Good Lord, woman," he whispered. "What are you doing here?" Sarah lowered her gun slowly, keeping her voice calm. "Looking for the truth. Did you know about these?" She showed him the entries. Henry's face crumpled. "I suspected. But Hartley, he owns this town. Has men like Henderson. Henderson's dead," Sarah cut in. 6 more with him. Hartley won't stop. Unless someone stands up. Henry's grip on the shotgun trembled. "I have a family. So do I," her voice sharpened. "Do you want your children growing up under Hartley's thumb, knowing you looked away?" The silence stretched. Then, slowly, Henry lowered the shotgun. "What do you need?" Sarah exhaled shakily. "Your testimony." She met Jake at the rendezvous, a decrepit barn at the edge of town. He wasn't alone. Sheriff Watson sat bound on a hay bale, looking older, broken. "Tom's ready to talk," Jake said flatly. Watson couldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I wanted to help, but Hartley, he had me by the throat. Money, threats. I was weak." Sarah shoved the ledger pages at him. $300 the week Samuel died. "You call that weakness?" "That's blood money, Sheriff." Watson flinched. "I didn't know they meant to kill him. I thought it was just land. By the time I realized..." He shook his head, tears streaking his dusty face. "I was in too deep." Jake's voice was quiet, dangerous. You don't belong to Hartley anymore. Question is, are you brave enough to stand up? For a moment, Watson was silent. Then he whispered, the Jameson gang Hartley hired them. He has letters in his safe, orders, payments. I've seen them. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. She'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed. Samuel had been murdered for profit. Watson's eyes finally met hers. I've been a coward too long. But maybe it's not too late to set it right. The plan formed quick. At noon the next day, when Hartley strutted into town for his usual Monday at the bank, Watson and Morrison would move. Jake and Sarah would cover them. If even one soul warns him, Jake said grimly, we're dead. Then we die fighting, Sarah replied, checking her pistol. Jake caught her hand, squeezing hard. No, we're not dying. Not today. I promised you. The church bell tolled noon. Main Street was packed tighter than usual. Word had spread. Hartley rolled up in his carriage, smug as ever, 4 armed guards at his side. Watson stepped into the street. His voice rang out, steadier than Sarah had ever heard. Josiah Hartley, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and fraud. Hartley laughed, sharp and cruel. Have you lost your mind, Tom? You work for me. Not anymore. Watson drew his gun. Come quietly. The street exploded into gunfire. Jake's rifle cracked from the livery stable, dropping 1 guard instantly. Sarah, perched on the millinery roof, sighted down her pistol and squeezed. Another guard spun away, wounded. The townsfolk scattered, then rallied, years of resentment boiling over. Henry Morrison dragged men forward, shouting for them to stand with justice. Within minutes, 2 guards were dead, another bleeding in the dust. The 4th surrendered, hands raised. Hartley cowered behind his carriage, fine suit torn, face twisted with rage. Sarah climbed down, ribs screaming, but she stood tall. It's over, Hartley. Your reign of terror ends today. His eyes locked on her, venomous. You stupid woman. You could have had money, safety. Instead you chose ruin. Jake strode forward, rifle steady. She chose freedom. His fist snapped out, sending Hartley sprawling unconscious in the dirt. And I say that's fair. The safe yielded everything Watson promised, letters, receipts, the proof of Samuel's murder. Within 3 days, a federal judge rode in. The trial was swift. Hartley was convicted, his land seized, his power broken. Sarah stood at Samuel's grave that evening, fresh wildflowers in her hand. The sky blazed with sunset, and Jake stood silently beside her, Thomas playing nearby. We did it, she whispered. Found justice. Kept our boy safe. I hope you're at peace now. Jake's hand found hers. He is, because you're alive. And because you're not alone. They were married a week later in the small church that had once judged her. Thomas carried the rings, beaming. Jake looked uncomfortable in his suit, but proud as ever. I do, he said firmly. With all my heart, Sarah answered, voice steadied out. The kiss that sealed wasn't desperate or defiant. It was tender, filled with promise. Together they rebuilt, not just the barn, but a new house with a wide porch and strong walls. Jake raised horses. Sarah planted a garden with the seeds he'd once given her, watching them sprout in soil made rich by fire and loss. Thomas grew tall and strong, learning from Jake, loving Sarah, carrying Samuel's spirit in his laughter. Sometimes, at sunset, Sarah would catch Jake watching her with wonder, as if still surprised she had chosen him. She'd smile, remembering the words that had changed everything. Get your things. You're mine now. No longer a command, but a covenant. A promise. A belonging. She was his, and he was hers. The prairie wind carried sage and promise across the land, and Sarah Colton knew she was exactly where she belonged. Wife, mother, survivor. A family forged in fire, tempered by love, unbreakable dot, and in the glow of another western sunset, 3 hearts beat as one.